Yo, so the middle school drama of whether 44111 versus 43311 seems like a never-ending saga, and there is a pretty good reason for that, because there's not necessarily a definitive, yes, this is the only thing you should ever go for. Yeah, sure, 43311 has the best damage potential. That is something that everybody should be working towards eventually, but especially in these earlier stages of the game when resources are low and it's a lot easier to farm the 4-cost echoes, it's actually a viable way to go in some cases, depending on you and your account specifically. So that's why this is a bit of a complicated issue, and that's why the saga seems to never die, because there's always a bit of nuance to it. There's always a bit of, hey, is this actually viable right now or not? But let's stop yapping about and get into this thing. Alright, so I just wanted to point out that you can only actually run the 44111 setup in a meaningful way on 3 different elements, or more accurately, 3 different sets. You can do it on the Electro, which is the Void Thunder set. You can do this on Havoc, which is the Sun Sinking Eclipse set. And you can do this on the Moonlit Cloud set, which is known as the Energy Regen set. The way this would work is there are 2 different enemy types that can drop the 4-cost echoes. That is the Overlord class. As you can see here, the Impermanence Heron is an Overlord class. And you can also do this on the Calamity class Echo Bellborn Geoshilon. I hopefully am saying that right. I'm probably not, because I'm stupid. But it doesn't necessarily matter if they're a Calamity or an Overlord. As you can see, the Void Thunder here, we can use the Thundering Mephis, and we can also use the Tempest Mephis, just so that you guys are aware. As long as it's a different echo, you can get the effect. Let's just go ahead and prove this really quickly with Rover. Disregard the stats you see on this Rover. The Rover is level, but the Rover is not built. These are just placeholders to show you guys what I'm talking about. Here is a 4-cost echo right here, as you can see, and here is another 4-cost echo, and then you have 1, 1, 1, and they're all different echoes. And as you can see right here on the left, you can see that we are getting the 5 out of 5 Sonata effect. This is what you want to see. This is why 44111 can work on some echo sets, but not all. One of the reasons people like to do this is because they can get crit value on those 4-cost echoes, and when you double up on it like that, you can double up on the crit value and then go with substats for all the attack and everything else that you might be able to get. You are losing out on elemental damage, but you are basically banking heavily on those crit stats. Now, as you can see here, we have 2 crit rate pieces. You might be able to go with a crit rate, crit damage piece, and then everything else basically dumps into attack, as you can see. And you're not able to do this in a 43311 setup. Let's just, I don't know, an example here with Kilcharo. As you can see, the 3-cost echoes here have elemental damage bonuses or some other type of damage bonus, rather than having something like a crit piece like you see here. It's a lot easier to build up the crit stats that people like to see when you are running a 44111 setup than a 43311 setup, at least in the early game. But unfortunately, I don't think that people necessarily should be running the 44111 in the long term. But in the short term, 44111 can be viable, and it can be a lot easier to build. But you are putting resources technically towards pieces you might not necessarily use in the future. As you can see here with Kilcharo and Yinlin, it's actually kind of okay. You could be basically leveling up pieces that you could use for your Kilcharo, and then after your Kilcharo, you can end up putting them on your Yinlin after the fact. So definitely an option that is not necessarily bad, because the 4-piece that you don't use on your Kilcharo down the line might eventually just end up getting used on your Yinlin. So definitely something that's viable, but the damage potential on 43311 is going to be better down the line. As certain things progress, you might be able to get, really incredible substat rolls, and you might be able to make a 44111 setup, viable in comparison to a 43311 setup. But one thing to remember with this whole entire thing is that it is genuinely stat dependent. So when people say whether 44111 and 43311 is better than the other, it really depends person to person, account to account. It depends completely on stat rolls. Not every single account is going to be the same. And when people are running calculators, unfortunately, they can't factor in every single individual person's account. But what running calculators gives us the damage potential, and they can put all of the echoes on an even playing field, showing us the full potential of that gear. But again, it will end up actually depending mostly on not the potential of the gear, but on the stats of the player's gear specifically. But like I was saying, in the long term, you're going to want to go for a 4-3-3-1-1 setup if you want to hit your true potential. But the fall off is not necessarily always that big with a 4-4-1-1-1 setup. It genuinely is account dependent and investment dependent. So if you are willing to, if you have the opportunity to try to go for, let's say, the Thunder set, it's not a bad time to do it for at least the Void Thunder set with Kalcharo and Yinlin. But if you don't have that setup, it's not necessarily the best move to go for. If you have like just Kalcharo or just Yinlin, it's not necessarily the greatest move to make. But if you are going for something like this, you can see here with these echoes on, let's say, the Moonlit set is typically put on supports, or it's put on like sub DPS type of characters in most cases. So this is not necessarily a bad choice because it might allow you to be able to use a lot less investment on your like your return. Like you don't have to necessarily farm as hard for this gear, so it might be viable in the early game. And especially in the early game, people should not be leveling up their echoes fully in most cases anyway, unless they get incredibly god tier rolls. That's a rare situation though. Most people should not be leveling their echoes all the way because, let's be honest here, we probably haven't gotten those god rolls yet on a lot of that gear. So there are situations where 4-4-1-1-1 is a pretty good idea, but it will depend account to account. 4-3-3-1-1 will be the better option to go for just basically all of the time. The thing about this whole drama is that nobody is arguing, right? Nobody in their right mind is arguing that 4-3-3-1-1 is inferior to 4-4-1-1-1. It is always going to be the better potential with the 4-3-3-1-1 setup. It's just that especially in the early game, when your resources are low, when farming is really hard, and these 3 cost echoes are really, really hard to get your hands on. I got incredibly lucky with this bird here because it rolled a double crit, right? It even rolled attack, and it has heavy attack damage as well. Depending on the character, this could be really, really solid, right? But not everybody's going to have that. And this is just one relic, or sorry, this is just one echo. You're going to need a lot of echoes for your account, right? You might be running a different gear. Now, one thing I want to point out that I have been pointing out in a lot of other videos is that another way to save your resources, and arguably a better way to save your resources, is actually going for the Lingering Tunes set. This is the attack set. Most DPS characters are going to be able to run this set because most DPS characters will be scaling off of attack. So you could actually run this gear on pretty much any DPS character. You would farm out the Mech Abomination for the main echo, and then you could farm out either the Bear, which is like one of the most abundant echoes in the entire game, so you have a ton of opportunities to be able to have that drop. You can also farm the Flautist, which drops Electro 2 in case you guys wanted that. You can also farm out this Chasm Guardian, which drops Havoc. It could drop the Lingering Tune set, and it can also drop the Rejuvenating set. This Chasm Guardian drops everything you could pretty much need because everybody probably wants to build up their Havoc Rover eventually, right? And you also need a Rejuvenating set for your healer, right? So this guy drops that. And he also drops the Lingering Tune set as well, as you can see here on the data bank right here on the bottom. When you go to Lingering Tunes, he is one of the available echoes that can drop this. So in my opinion, this is probably a very good setup if you want to save resources on your account, is to build the Lingering Tune set with a 4-3-3-1-1 setup. And that is a really great way to save resources on your account. You just build a really good version of this and you can swap this gear around. When you're in the Tower of Adversary, you can totally leave the Tower of Adversary mid-battle and switch it onto other characters. In case you guys didn't know that, you literally don't have to have like 9 different characters with 9 different setups of gear. You only necessarily need to have like 3 or 4 or whatever you need to get the minimum amount. You can totally run it. You only need to have certain weapons leveled too. You can change around your weapons, you can change around your echoes. In the Tower of Adversary, you just leave the Tower of Adversary, switch around your relics on your characters, and then go back in. Unfortunately, you can't switch around the echoes and gear while you're inside the Tower of Adversary, but you're not penalized for leaving, then switching your gear, and then going back in with different characters with different gear on them. And so, unfortunately, because of the way this all works, there is not going to be a definitive ending to this drama. I think most people understand that 4-3-3-1-1 is the best setup you can go for, but people are basically arguing that 4-4-1-1-1 is viable in the early game, which it is, or it's viable if you simply have not been able to get the 3 cost echoes you need to make your sets work. Which is why I offered you the suggestion of using the Lingering Tune set, because once you have one good setup for that set, you can run it on basically any of your other characters while you are creating all of the other elemental damage bonus setups that you want individually for your main DPS characters that you want to go for. So my hope is that you, the player, the individual, can make an educated decision for yourself based on what you have on your account, whether you should be running a 4-4-1-1-1 for right now while you build up that 4-3-3-1-1, or just go straight for the 4-3-3-1-1. It's all going to be dependent on what you have and what resources you have, etc., etc. Some other content creators have already weighed in on this very heavily. I will link different people's videos that I feel like I can trust, that I can send your way to, in the pinned comment and description below. I've seen Gacha Smack talk about this. Obviously, 1010 talked about this. Those two kind of had like a beef, but not really a beef. It was kind of like over dramatized. I also saw I Win to Lose had a video on this, and I don't know if I'm saying this person correctly, but I believe it's either Meiji or Maiji. Anyways, I will link their videos in the pinned comment and description below. Some of them do have damage calculators going over this stuff. Not everybody comes to the same conclusions because not everybody's damage calculators are exactly the same, so keep that in mind. But I think everybody is on the same page here, right? It's just some people's advice on what to do based on that information might slightly differ content creator to content creator. You know what I mean? That's where the nuance is right there. But I think the best way you can say this is it's based on what you have and what your substats are on your specific account. Everyone knows you should work towards 4-3-3-1-1 down the line, but 4-4-1-1-1 can be viable depending on what you have on your account. Anyways, if you found this helpful or informative in any way, shape, or form, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. It does help out the channel. And go check out those other content creators' videos as well. Peace out.